Hello everyone, my name is Isyana Valentina Lubis, and at this time I would like to invite you to study together with me, and we want to discuss about one of topic in English language. What it is? Okay, I will tell you that is a narrative text. But for that, I want to ask you, do you know about story about Snow story, or Cinderella story, or Malin Kundang story, or Beauty and the Beast story? So if you know about that, all of the story, we can include the story into narrative text. So because of that, what the meaning of the narrative text? Narrative text is in an imaginative text that to entertain the people. So based of that, narrative text is a story that imaginative or made by person from the imaginative person. And then what the actual purpose of narrative text? Okay, for the next part is what is the actually purpose of the narrative text. So based on the meaning of the story or the meaning of the narrative text, the purpose of narrative text is to amuse or to entertain the reader or the listener. For a generic structure of narrative text, there are four parts. For part number 1 is the orientation, part number 2 is the complication, and then the third is the resolution, and the last is reorientation or coda. For orientation is about the opening paragraph where the characters of the story are introduced. Orientation, or commonly referred to as introductions, contains about why, who, when, where, and the story is that. For the complication is where the problems come and the problems make in the story. Complication tells about the beginning of the problem and what is commonly called climax. This is usually involves the main character of the story. For the third is resolutions. Resolution is where the problems in the story is solved. In this part, in the end of the story of solution about the problem of the story, and then problem can be solved better or worse, which will the make story the happy or sad ending. For the last is reorientation or coda. Reorientation or coda, we can call it an optional because in the story, reorientation or coda is there in story may not. Because in reorientation part, we found the lesson of the story, or the lesson can the reader or listener can take for the story. Okay, in this part we will talk about the characteristic of narrative text. There are some the characteristic of narrative text. For number 1 is using simple past or past tense, because this story is an imaginative story. That means the story has been happened but in imaginative person. So because of that, the story of narrative text have to use the simple past tense. For number two is using adverb of times, like you once upon a time, like one day, long time ago, and etc. Number 3 is using direct and indirect speech, because an imaginative story, in this story we will found the character of the story will say something in the story. So because of that, in the story, the people or the person or the animal use direct speech and then indirect speech. For the last is using time of conjunction, like when, then, and suddenly. There are some kind of narrative text. For number 1 is fairy tale. Fairy tale is a children's story about magical, imaginary, and things and lands. And for number 2 is folk tale. That is a story originating in popular culture, typically passed by word or a mouth. And then myth. Myth is a traditional story, especially one concerning the yearly story. of the people and explaining some natural or social phenomena and typically involving supernatural beings or events. For number 4 is fable. Fable is a story about the character of the story is include the animal, like the animal act like human. For number 5 is legend. Legend is a traditional story sometimes popularly regarded as history and authenticated. For number 6 is romance. Number 7 is a personal experience. Personal experience is experience that have been through by a person, and then the experience make into short story. We can conclude the story is in narrative text. For number 5 is slice of life, is a realistic representation of everyday experience in a movie, play, or book. And the last horror. Horror is a story like scary story or short story and etc. We can, after we discuss about narrative text, at this time I would like to invite you to see some example or one of sample of narrative text. You can see the title is Fox and the Cat. One day a cat and a fox were having a conversation. The fox, who has cousins scattered, boasted how clever she was. "Why, I know at least 100 tricks to get away from a mutual enemies," the dog said. "I know only trick to get away from dogs." And said the cat, "You should teach me some of yours." Well, and then maybe someday when I have time, I may teach you a few of the simpler ones, replied the fox early. Just then they heard the barking of a pack of dogs in the distance. The barking grew louder and louder. The dogs were coming in their directions, and at once the cat ran to the nearest tree and climbed into its branches. "Well out of reach, any dog. This is the trick I told you. The only one I know," said the cat. "Which one of your 100 tricks are you going to use?" The fox sat suddenly under the tree, wondering which tree she would use. Before she could make up her mind, the dogs arrived. She fell upon the fox and tore her to pieces. So, at the end, a single plan that works is better than 100 plans. After you read or see my example, you can see this is one of the example of narrative text. You can see the word or the sentence used in this narrative text is used simple past tense, as I told you before. And then this is kind of narrative text that we can call it the fable, as I told you before the meaning of the fable definitions. And then we can see one day until to line 2 is the orientation, and then line 3 until line 6 is the complication, and then the line 7 until line 10 is a resolution. And then in the story we don't found the resolution is also before the resolution is optional part. So because of that, I think it's enough about my explanation about narrative text, and see you and thank you. Bye bye.